Straightforward.
Yep.
Recommendation 53. This is all cemeteries and various other things. Recommendation 54. Recommendation 55.
Straightforward. Done.
50. Oh, now down we're on to Papakainga. Recommendation. Gosh, we've gone back to recommendation 1. How did that happen? Eh? Yeah, I know, but how come we've gone from recommendation 55 to recommendation 1?
Oh, it's on page 25. We're just following the recommendations numbers that the Minister has used.
Oh, I see.
Fortunately, sometimes they go back to 1.
Okay, all right. I know. I thought I was really cooking on gas there. The Papakainga zone. So recommendation 1. Recommendation 2. Yeah.
I was just really struggling to understand this Papakainga. So basically they want us to be more permissive and enabling. Is that kind of where they're getting to? So we just basically say, this is Papakainga, it's up to Māori to basically develop as they see fit.
Yes, the chapter as it was written had a number of restrictive standards and provisions in there. Essentially what the chapter was designed, as we talked it through to you, was it was meant to be a very enabling zone. Essentially we would just deal with any of the external adverse effects, and as you say, Councillor, it's really up for the owners of the Papakainga area to determine how to develop the area in accordance with their culture. There are some standards and provisions which will still apply. For example, natural hazards, landscape, coastal, and those matters still apply. But in terms of how they wish to develop the area, whether it's for some housing, for education, cultural centres or whatever, then that's up for them to determine and to deal with within that area of land. All we're dealing with is any external adverse effects.
Excellent.
Is there any controls over things like height?
Yes, the height is controlled by those standards which relate to recession planes and maximum height.
Well, I think that's amazing that you're able to do such a extraordinary amount of reworking.
Thank you.
And I think it will be responded to extremely positively. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Recommendation 3. Recommendation 4.
Straightforward.
Recommendation. There's lots of recommendation 4 because they're general rules and procedures. Recommendation 5. Yep.
What changes you're recommending? Is there kind of a text to what you've done?
So the Minister's comments was around the Stage 2 chapters seeking to make any modifications to the Stage 1 definitions. So as part of the review, for example, for height, the Stage 2 chapter was recommending adding another exemption for height for spires on spiritual facilities. The advice that we've had is to try to avoid, and the Minister's comment has been to avoid making any changes to the Stage 1 definitions to reduce the complexity of the process for participants. So what I'm recommending here is, rather than changing the Stage 1 definition to add that exemption, adding the exemption into the rules themselves. So the effect is basically the same. It's rather than saying that spires of spiritual facilities are exempt from the definition of height, we're saying in the scheduled activities rules they're permitted to go up to 9 meters or 12 meters for spires. So it's not changing the effect of
Yeah,
the
I just was meaning under the recommendation 3, where you've got general rules and procedures. You've said additional strategic direction, objectives, amendments to objective setup decisions are not required. The general rules changes are discussed as each topic is proposed. So basically, you've put in objectives and strategic directions, on each different chapter now?
Well, the recommendation of the minister was that we consider, as a result of the decision on the strategic directions chapter, whether or not we needed to introduce additional objectives and policies to cover our stage 2 chapter.
Right.
So where that's removed policies around certain things, just to ensure that the provisions that we're proposing are still consistent with the decision on the strategic directions chapter. And this is just saying that they are. We're not proposing any additional objectives.
Can I suggest something that would be really useful to put in here? Would be that we've also done an assessment under the RMA. So, because if you take the quarrying, for example, it becomes really clear that there's a competing, often a contradictory approach between the RMA and the Minister's statement of expectation. And so I think it's our job to kind of, take into account the Minister's comments, but also we have to have consideration of the RMA, which is equally as important and weighted. And I just think it would be useful to have something in here that made reference to the fact that, particularly where we've disagreed with the Minister's comments or not made changes, the reason for doing that is based on an RMA assessment around sustainable management and the principles of the RMA.
Sorry, I can't see where this fits into the general rules and procedures.
No. What you're talking about, Councillor, is already in her section 32, which is why she's giving this recommendation.
What you're saying is that we've put in these things on a topic by topic basis, which is fine.
No. Instead of saying that a spiritual facility is exempt from the maximum building height, it says the maximum building height is this for everything, but this for Aspire on its
Sorry, you went really quickly. I was on recommendation 3,
what is recommendation 3?
Back on
page
page
37.
37.
Oh, gosh. Sorry, you actually haven't moved to recommendation 4.
No.
There are two comments from the ministers here. One was around making sure that we don't need to introduce any new strategic directions objectives to cover the proposal for general rules stage 2. And the other was to consider whether the objectives and policies in the proposal are giving effect to strategic directions. So the recommendation that I've made is that we don't need to add any strategic directions, objectives, or policies, but that each of the subtopics has considered in its objectives and policies whether or not it's consistent with the new decision on the strategic directions chapter.
Yeah.
That's all that is.
But what we also need to do, like if you take quarrying, is we need to weigh up the sustainable management under the RMA of our natural resource and our environmental impacts. So I'm just worried that we kind of assume that the only kind of direction around our strategic direction for our general rules and procedures is based on the statement of expectation and the new strategic directions rather than the actual RMA, which is also equally as important.
No, there's an assessment against the RMA as well in section 32.
Great.
But I mean, we'll deal with that when we deal with the individual ones that we want to, address in that way, like we're going to come back to a strategic discussion around the buffers for quarrying and the meter and things like that. And of course the Resource Management Act responsibilities are part of that, but I don't see that that's relevant to our discussion around general rules and procedures. So can we move on to recommendation 4? Recommendation 5. Yep.
On the first part of recommendation 4, the overlay for Littleton creating an area for the market, I noticed that you're not recommending any, or you've got NA in fact in there. The complexity for participants, the only participants involved would of course be the people that run that Littleton market in that stage 1 definition when we take that out of the context of stage 2. The reason why that was in stage 1 was in response to community feedback through the Littleton Master Plan in particular. I notice now that this stage 1 definition has become involved in the stage 2 decision, and that's already been done. What concerns me is that potentially delays resolution of this matter where we've got an activity running in Littleton which is supported by the community and the Littleton Master Plan outcome, which continues to be a non-complying activity. And by merging stage 1 with stage 2, we then don't deal with this as an issue of its own, which in fact it is, but in the wider context of temporary activities. That actually wasn't a question, I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, I guess just some explanation of where we've landed on that and what the likely outcomes are going to be now. Because, I mean, the Minister's comment is around reducing complexity. Looking at the background to why stage 1 and stage 2 have been dealt with separately in the beginning, there is no complexity because the only person or the only body there would be complexity for are the people running the Littleton market. And their desire is to get this resolved as quickly as possible.
With your leave, if I could just call Mark Stevenson, he's just gone back to his desk. He's probably the best one to speak to that because of the commercial nature of this particular definition.
Okay, well, shall we come back to it when he comes back? So that was recommendation 4. So that's the only issue on recommendation 4 that we'll come back to that when, yep, okay. Recommendation 5, recommendation 6.
Water setbacks, this was raised at the start. I just want someone to explain, are we making it easier for people to do stuff in water setbacks? Are we making it harder? What are the changes?
This is the GIS-based online platform rather than PDF.
No, but there's a number of stuff around water setbacks. This is why I raised it as a kind of one of those
This
general...
is adding the inline maps of water body classifications into the plan.
You know,
What's that got to do with setbacks?
there's a whole bunch of rules in 4, 5, 7, 6 that talk about water body setbacks.
No,
So
you've
this is why I raised it at the
gone
start.
back into 4. That's the thing.
It's all of them. I asked for a general explanation as to what we're changing around water setbacks and what effectively it means.
So you seem to be, where is it?
We're going back to
Jumping ahead to page 46,
No,
potentially.
39. Going back to 39, setbacks, water body setbacks.
Yes, but as you were rightfully saying, that's about just simply how they occur on the maps. The actual issues of water bodies is on page 46, is that correct?
Well, I think, were you asking for clarification about the effect of the rules overall, or about the
Yeah,
changes?
so
in
it
the
starts
The
on page
changes to the
39,
rules on
and
the
it goes-
setbacks for water bodies.
Like just in general, I'm just trying to understand at a high level kind of what the proposed amendments that we're looking to do in terms of our water bodies. So
There's several changes that are proposed in the chapter, and generally the effect would be to make it more difficult to develop in water body setbacks. So one of the changes is around removing some of the exemptions that exist at the moment. So one exemption says if they already have a building consent, they don't need a resource consent. But the resource consent process assesses different matters from the building consent. So for building foundations, potentially it would become more difficult to develop in the setback. Raising the activity status from restricted discretionary to discretionary in sites of ecological significance, and introducing some new controls around fencing and impervious surfacing because they have effects on the flood storage capacity and land drainage. So trying to address some of those effects. So I think the general effect of the rule is to make it more difficult to build in the setbacks.
which is around, again, removing written approval notification requirements.
Right. In this case, in the operative plan, there's no controls on fences or impervious surfacing in the setbacks. So we're proposing for the first time that consents would be required for those types of developments in the setbacks. And one of the reasons for potentially removing the requirement for notification is because it is a new rule which would significantly potentially increase costs for applicants for fences and some of those types of developments. So that was why I was recommending in this case, in order to simplify that process for applicants to not require notification.
And yeah, okay, so like ECAN, for example, might be interested in what people do in terms of a water setback. They wouldn't be notified.
For something like a fence that was built over a waterway, if this recommendation was adopted, then there wouldn't be notification for the fence.
I'm just trying to understand the test of leaving it in. So if something really bad is proposed and the neighbours or someone that uses the waterway gets really concerned, they would be notified. If we make the changes that you're recommending, people basically wouldn't have any chance to know that it had happened, and effectively there's no control. Like,
I thought you said there weren't any controls now.
There aren't in the operative plan. So the fencing controls are proposed for the first time.
So this is a new control.
But one of the reasons for the control is because of the effects that it could have on transferring natural hazards to other sites, or the amenity effects on other sites, which is why in the original draft proposal I hadn't removed the requirement for notification.
because it might transfer the risk to someone
Yeah.
else, which I think is a sensible thing to be. If someone's going to be adversely impacted on, then I think they should be notified. And I mean, Paul and I are dealing with a number of cases in the hills, stormwater runoff and boundary fences. So personally, I can't see any justification for removing it, other than I know that the Minister wants us to remove notification, but I think the risks here are too great.
It's difficult to kind of make a final call on that. Can we get some more information on that one? I don't think that there are many areas where we need to depart from this, but because I don't really know the implications of bringing in a requirement for the first time and adding on this notification requirement. And how would you know? I mean, but if you have to get a consent for breaching the impervious surfacing and fencing standards, which are introduced for the first time, who judges whether the impact is such that you wouldn't grant the consent?
Well, the standard is 10% allowed impervious surfacing in the waterway setback. So if somebody wanted to develop more than that, they would need to come in for a consent. And when they come in for the consent application, normally the planner processing that consent would make a decision about whether or not it should be notified. Right. Unless there's a rule in the plan saying that it won't be notified. So the effect of adding this would be to make that decision in advance, to say this is a minor development and we don't want to add that additional cost as part of the application. So we skip that stage.
Well, you can kind of get that for impervious surfacing and trust that the consequences are not a flow-on effect, deliberate use of words to another property. Mm-hmm. What about the fencing standards, though? I mean, does that ever become an issue? I mean, if people can't just put fences along our rivers, can they?
They have.
Yeah, I know, but I mean,
some controls in the bylaws around fences that are obstructing waterways, but there aren't general controls about fences for amenity issues, or it's a very reactive process. So generally, people put up their fence, and then there's some rules in the bylaws that allow council to come along and request that they remove them because they're obstructing the waterways. But generally, that needs to be quite a serious issue before that process is undertaken.
So why are we writing in this requirement when...
The requirement to remove notification?
No, why are we writing in a requirement for impervious surfacing and fencing standards if we haven't had them before?
Well, based on the advice of the Asset and Network Planning Unit, there's been a number of issues around fencing being built directly along the edge of the waterway, and it has quite negative amenity effects. It transfers floodwaters from one property to another property. Yep. There's sort of a number of issues that have been raised as a result of it.
So the council would enforce that
Yeah,
through the consent process?
Yeah.
And a neighbour wouldn't necessarily know that that was an issue that was going to have an impact on their property?
if the notification requirements were removed.
No, but I mean, even if the notification were there, if I lived alongside a river and someone down the road was going to build a fence, I wouldn't necessarily know. I probably would sign a consent because they're my mate down the road, not knowing that they were transferring their flood risk to me, you know, like, so actually it probably is better to be a council process.
If we had the notification requirements in there, would make a call about whether the effects were more than minor. And if they were more than minor, then they would maybe say it should be limited to being notified on the two people adjacent, which I personally think seems reasonable. So it's not saying everyone will be notified, it just gives the staff an opportunity to say, actually, these impacts are going to be quite, more than minor, and therefore we think the neighbours or the wider community should be notified.
Yeah, but the thing is that maybe they don't. Maybe the truth is that you don't want fences going up that are going to transfer the risk to another property. You can't rely on a notification process. You've actually got to rely on a robust council consenting process.
Well, that may be the case, but people generally feel pretty aggrieved when things happen next to them and they have no chance, they're not notified of it. So when they first see a big purple fence that's 3 feet tall, 3 metres tall, they are likely to get quite upset that no one thought that they should be notified. And then we go through, the only thing we can then do is go, oh, well, we have to go for a judicial review, and then, that's going to cost $50,000.
Yeah, but this has got nothing to do with purple fences that are 3 metres tall. It's to do with a fencing standard and impervious surfacing provision that has never been in our rules before. So I'm just asking, is it a step too far to require it to be notified?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we just have a different point of view. I personally can't see the harm in having it notified and actually think it's better to do that.
Right. No, because I just kind of feel like I really have to drive on as fast as I can. The process of sort of kind of setting things to one side if they want to take time hasn't really worked as well as I thought it might. So, we're have we got the Littleton one?
Yes.
Here? Right.
Yes.
If I just provide brief context, stage one, the commercial chapter had rules in it specific for Littleton which permit the market in the street. In stage two, the land the market sits on, the road, is being zoned as a transport zone. So effectively the rule in the commercial chapter wouldn't be relevant because it's essentially becoming a transport zone through the whole review process. So what that means for the temporary activity rules is, the temporary activity rules apply to the transport zone in stage two. And my understanding of the temporary activity rules is that the rules permit the market in the transport zone if it's authorised by council as road controlling authority. So effectively, it's saying the district plan is not the mechanism for managing it. Any temporary activity in the road zone, in the transport zone, is to be managed by council's other arm, being the road controlling authority.
Thank you. So that's the effect of moving it into the stage two rather than stage one. So it actually does reduce complexity anyway, as in the Minister's comments in recommendation 4.
Yeah, it essentially avoids someone having to, there'd be confusion as to where to look in the plan if it's in a transport zone, but the rule sits in the commercial chapter. So by sitting in the temporary activity rules for the transport zone, it seeks to make it clearer. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for that additional information. Thank you.
That's great. So we've got 4, we've got 5 and 6. 7, I just think that maybe we'll put that one on hold and deal with that next week as well. Because I'm just a little I'm just really unsure about it actually.
Okay.
Yeah, recommendation 8. Straightforward.
Yep.
9,
You thought that was straight.
10. And then we've got the
And 11.
water setbacks. 11.
You want to discuss that? Is that controversial?
The minister's comments was around trying to reduce the complexity of the rules, possibly
Yeah.
by reducing the number of categories.
Yeah,
So
by
it's
having
been-
exemptions rather than permitted activities.
Yeah, and repeating it in all 3 areas. So I think that's relatively straightforward.
Yep.
Um,
Recommendation 12,
Straightforward.
13, 14.
Yeah, so 14, we just had a small amendment. In the table, there was a little inconsistency between recommendation 14 and recommendation 147 in the definition.
Can I just refer you to the additional piece of paper that was tabled? The
Oh, yeah.
changes?
Yep, draft table.
That's right.
Yep.
And take them through to the number.
And what page of that?
That's recommendation 8,
Recommendation 8.
page 8 of the changes.
Hopefully on page 8. Yep,
So this is just clarifying that the recommendation is not to propose any changes to the stage 1 definition of water body,
yep,
to have a stage 2 definition of water body margin, and then a very small change, just removing the list of examples of water body because they're not necessary and potentially create some confusion. And then as part of the definition of water body setback, removing the list of types of water bodies and replacing them with the terminology used elsewhere in the plan. So
Yeah.
it's just a clarification of the terminology used for those definitions.
yep. Recommendation 15, 16, 17.
Just on the wetlands, remove classification setbacks for wetlands. I couldn't, where's recommendation 28? And can you just,
Sorry, it's a mistake in the reference number. It should be number 11.
right,
So recommendation 11, the first one, was to remove the classification for wetlands because they've already been mapped as sites of ecological significance. So additional setbacks are no longer required.
okay, so we're not being any more permissive around what you can do around wetlands, we're just clarifying a detail within.
What we've done in the Natural and Cultural Heritage chapter is map the extent of the wetlands. So
Right.
rather, because it's quite difficult to interpret where the bank of the wetland is when it's dry over the summer. So rather than
Okay.
saying 50 meters from the bank, we're saying we've mapped where the wetland is. And
Right.
here's where the rules apply.
Okay, thanks, that's cool.
So we've got recommendation 18 and recommendation 19. And at this point, we get to general rules signs, and this is where I'm going to invite. Hey? Well, Tim is. Oh, Jamie is. All right. Is he? Okay. He just wants to do. Just doesn't think I'm doing a good enough job. I'll be back by 3:30. I will, promise. I don't care, so you can do what you like, but if there is, I would just suggest that if there are, that we won't, I mean, like, there aren't sufficient people here, so we shouldn't have, we had a vote before that was for all, I'll just, but, so, I don't think we should do, so if it's gonna be controversial, I don't think Homestar will be controversial. I don't think we'll either. No, so, but if there's going to be a division, I suggest that we don't have a vote today. We'll talk about when we go. Yeah.